Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that brings you behavioral insights on your marketing campaigns. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. But wait, Kurt. What do you mean by the podcast that brings you behavioral insights on your marketing campaigns? Aren't we all about the applying behavioral science to work and life?
Yes. And
we
explore insights into what will make your marketing campaigns more successful. And we do that, Tim, by talking with knowledgeable and highly experienced experts, academics, and authors about the very best practices in the marketing industry. It's all just part of the larger picture, Mr. Houlihan, all just part of the larger picture.
Okay. All right. I think I see where you're going here. That marketing is just one of the many areas that behavioral science insights can make a difference for our listeners. And, of course, it's just one of the many areas that we talk about on the program.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And I have to say that this episode does focus on marketing, absolutely. But the insights are applicable across a lot of different areas, not just marketing.
That is so true. And we will explore that in more detail in our grooving session. But let's get on with the show right now. And so for this episode, we speak with the remarkable Nancy Harhut. Nancy is co-founder and chief creative officer at HBT Marketing, a consultancy that specializes in applying behavior techniques to marketing. And Tim, I have to tell you, Nancy knows her stuff. I was going to say another word there, but I said stuff instead.
Okay. I'm good with either word, but stuff works for me, and she sure does. I couldn't agree more. She and I have followed each other on LinkedIn for many years, and I got to tell you, it was such a pleasure to get to speak with her in person, to get that passion in her voice firsthand, and to hear her speak with such clarity about the applications of behavioral science, especially in marketing, of course. And it was just really fun, really cool.
Yeah, and we think you'll hear the same thing, listeners. In our conversation with Nancy, we talked about a lot of different things, but we want to call attention to a couple that we think you'll find particularly interesting. Rhyme as reason effect and the 9 effect. You're just going to have to listen and wait. There you go.
Ooh, it's going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
And if you like what you hear on Behavioral Grooves, week in and week out for the past 288 weeks, or roughly something like that, then please share it with a friend. Pass it along to a colleague, a teammate, a coworker, or a marketing executive that you think needs to hear about the applications of behavioral science.
Aren't colleague, teammate, and coworker the same thing, Tim?
Okay, yeah, I guess so. I just thought the list needed to be longer. So.
Your compatriot, your
fellow countryman,
your fellow. All right. Okay, Groovers, it's time to sit back with your 3-finger pour of a great marketing ideas and enjoy our conversation with Nancy Harhut.
Nancy Harhut, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Tim, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here.
And we are so glad to have you after, my gosh, all these years of connecting over social media. It's really good to actually see you and talk to you in person. It's really fun. Okay, but we're going to start with the speed round, and I have to know, coffee or tea?
Tea, day in and day out.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
You just made a friend with Tim.
Totally.
There you go.
I don't like coffee. I've tried. A couple of times we had coffee-related accounts, and so you'd go to the client meeting, and I'd be trying to choke it down, and it just, it's not right for me. So tea.
Bravo to you. I'm on the same track there. That's perfect. Okay, Kurt.
All right, second speed round question. Dinner with your favorite musician or actor?
Probably my favorite actor.
And that was a little hard, but who might that be?
Well, see, that's why it's hard. It's hard to zero in on a favorite musician, and it's hard to zero in on a favorite actor. Actually, if I could change my answer and choose like my favorite lyricist, I would be like around the Stephen Schwartz, Stephen Sondheim, Frank Lesser. Like I love Broadway musicals, so
apparently
I think that's where I would go. Apparently so. Yeah.
God, those are. I mean, when you put Frank Lesser and Stephen Sondheim in the same sentence, it just elevates. Like I feel like everything that we're going to say now just got better. I think that's fantastic. I think that's awesome. Okay. So here, this is a true-false question. Okay. So true or false, behavioral science has many applications for marketers.
Absolutely true. Absolutely, absolutely true.
Well, and we are going to spend some time on that today. Definitely.
All right. So I have a choice between two questions that we wrote out here. I'm going to ask Mr. Houlihan if the part A or part B, which one do you think we should go with here?
I thought part B was just really kind of cool.
Personally. Okay, we'll go with part B. All right. Okay. So, all right, Nancy, if a book contains information on the Zeigarnik effect, is it going to be a bestseller?
If a book contains information on the Zeigarnik effect, is it going to be a bestseller? I suppose it depends on how well it's written and
Fair enough. Fair enough.
We were trying because you have it's actually in one of the titles of one of your chapters, and it's like, oh my gosh, I love books that talk about the Zeigarnik effect, and so there you go.
Well,
for me, it would be a bestseller just because you have that included in. But
Kurt, thank you.
So with that, we are here to talk about your book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, Drive Customer Action and Loyalty by Prompting Instinctive Responses. So this is a book, it's aimed at marketers, right? Is that the intent?
It's absolutely aimed at marketers. And in fact, I want to say to anyone who, is a marketer or who has marketing on their to-do list, because there are marketers, and then there are people who are doing a lot of things, including marketing, and it's really meant for all of them. And, when you hear science in the title, you might kind of back off a little and think, ooh, this is going to be a little weighty. My eyes are going to roll back in my head, and the truth of the matter is it's short on science. It has just enough science to give you the proof points that you need, the legitimacy that you think, okay, I'm in the right place. But it's really more about providing those actionable tactics, so that practical advice that a marketer can use to increase the likelihood that they're going to get the engagement and response that they want. There's no silver bullet, there's no magic wand. You cannot force people to do something they don't want to do, but there's a lot of wiggle room in terms of how people make decisions. And if you happen to know a little bit about behavioral science, you can, kind of put a finger on the scale, I guess you can say. You can make it more likely that you're going to be able to connect with the people you want to connect with, and make it more likely that you're going to persuade them to do what you want them to do.
Yeah, I love this, that you start kind of with this basic premise that just because we have these tools doesn't mean that it's not mind control. We're not forcing people to do things that they wouldn't do. And maybe more importantly, you didn't write this just for people who are full-time marketers. I love the way that you frame this. People who have marketing on their to-do list, like they have to do some marketing. They have to do some kind of promotion. Tell us more about who you think can benefit from the book.
So, it's anyone from people who are in ad agencies, who are creating, marketing materials all the time, to people in a company that are in a marketing department, to entrepreneurs or small business people, people running small businesses where, marketing is one thing on a list of things that they need to attend to, not-for-profits, really it's just and then we can almost, and several people have told me this that have read the book, they're like, you say it's, behavioral science for marketing, but this is such powerful stuff that really anybody who is in a position where they need to convince someone or persuade someone should read this book. So it certainly, extends to sales, but even beyond that, just, in your normal life, as you're going about your career, as you're going about your personal life, you're going to be in a position where you're going to try to convince someone to see things your way, to do what you'd like to do. And there are, techniques and tactics and tips in the book that are scientifically proven, that are market tested, that are going to make it more likely that you'll be able to get a yes, to get that answer you're looking for.
It's interesting because as I was reading the book, that's what came to my mind. And actually what came to my mind, and this is probably the availability bias, because Tim and I work in this field and we talk to people who love behavioral science all the time and various different things, but I'm like going, marketing, don't all marketers already use behavioral science? I mean, and again, this comes from the experience that we've seen when we were working with companies. The people who were actually applying behavioral science inside those companies were mostly marketers. They were the advertising, Ogilvy, the advertising agencies that were bringing a big focus in on this. And then it was the people like in HR and in sales operations where Tim and I worked a lot, that were like, what is this stuff? And then you go, well, the people over in marketing are already using it, So is there still a big untapped market of marketers? And is it just me being biased by the people I talk to?
So I think maybe you're a little bit more plugged in. I think that you're absolutely right in that, behavioral science is tailor-made for marketing. Like at the end of the day, marketers are trying to convince people to do something, right? We're trying to influence behavior, and behavioral science is all about how to influence behavior, why people do what they do, and, the decision defaults that they rely on. And if marketers start to learn about that, can get out ahead of it, we can use it to our advantage. And so you would say, well, marketing is all about influencing people. Behavioral science is all about influencing people. Haven't the marketers been using it? And the truth of the matter is, in my opinion, at least, it's relatively new to the field. My roots were way back in direct marketing, actually, and we did an awful lot of testing. And, we tested our way into what would work. And I look back on some of the things that we did, and I can see the behavioral science that was at play there. But I can virtually guarantee you in some cases that that was not what we were applying at the time. We didn't know we were applying it. We had a hunch. We had a sense for what might work. We tested our way into something. Maybe it was serendipitous that we stumbled upon something. I can go way back to when AT&T broke up, right? AT&T used to be the long-distance company, monopoly, and then the Judge Green decision came down around 1982 or something like that, and it broke it up. And so all of a sudden you saw Sprint and MCI pop up, and I happened to be working at an agency at the time where we were representing AT&T, and my boss, the creative director at the time, was a guy named Frank Parrish, and he'd been struggling with the lead to this letter. So we'd been like writing to businesses saying, you need to choose a long distance company. You need to choose a long distance company. There was, this period in time called pre-subscription where the, AT&T was broken up. People had to choose whether they wanted to stay with AT&T or move to Sprint or move to MCI, but they had to make a choice. And, we were hammering people with this information, and it was getting close to the end of that period. And at the end of that period, if you didn't make a choice, one was going to be made for you. And that was where he ended up. He's trying to figure out what to say. And we, talked about, you've been with us for a long time. We know you. You can rely on us. We have all these advantages, all the stuff, the benefits, everything you would, think to talk about. But then he hit on this line where he opened a letter saying, you have a decision to make, and if you don't make one soon, one will be made for you. And he got a 38.6% response rate, which was unheard of, right? It was incredible. And I remember the day that he came in because he'd been like worrying it, and he finally had it, and he came in and he told me, and I remember thinking, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Like I didn't really realize how brilliant it was, and years later I thought, I'm like, oh my God. And he was using something known as the autonomy bias, which is the human deep-seated desire to exercise some kind of control over ourselves and our environment. We want some kind of agency. And, I talked to him about it, when I was writing the book. I'm like, Frank, how did you come up with this? Do you remember it? First of all, he goes, oh, I remember it well. And, he said it took me, probably 2 weeks to write that lead, and then maybe a couple of hours to finish the rest of the letter, but he'd been trying. And he said, back then you would think there'd be all this great data because, AT&T had been the only game in town, and so they had all the customers, so they should know everything, but yet they really didn't, or at least we didn't have access to it. And he said, so I didn't know if I was talking to small businesses or large corporations. I had no idea. But all I knew, all I suspected was if you were in business, you didn't want someone else telling you what to do. And that's what led him to that line. And I thought it was amazing,
That is amazing. It's magnificent, actually. And it brings me to thinking about measurement and how oftentimes, again, in the work that Kurt and I have done together with clients, there's oftentimes a question about, well, how will we know that this works? What's the proof point? How are we going to measure this in a way that you're going to demonstrate that this crazy idea, this behavioral science stuff is actually going to work? How let's talk a little bit about the application, if you would, for just a minute. And how do you set up an environment where you can measure and then demonstrate that the behavioral science lens or tools actually brought about some kind of benefit?
Yeah. So, there are a couple of different ways to do it. One is a very strict, head-to-head test where you identify one variable and, you put two pieces out there, maybe, two digital ads or two emails, and there's only, one thing that's different. Maybe you have one different, word in the subject line, or you have one subject line versus another subject line, And it's very specific, one isolated variable. And then, the other way to look at it is just kind of, can you beat the control? So here's a piece, the email, the direct mail piece, the ad, whatever, that's been, doing really, really well. Historically, it's the best performing thing. Can you go out and challenge it and beat it? Or you look at, performance at a certain time, like the performance, last Christmas versus this Christmas. Last Christmas we use that. This Christmas we use this. And of course, the problem with that is the time is different. There are other variables that get introduced. But typically what we do is we go up against a control for our clients. They're like, all right, they'll come to us and say, this is what we have. This has been working the best. We've tested several things against it. So far, nothing has beaten it because controls are difficult to beat, but, take a shot at it. And, we'll go in with a combination of behavioral science plus, marketing best practices, put those two together, create what we think is going to be the most effective piece of communication. And then they'll test it against what's historically been performing for them. The two go head to head in the market and, one of them wins, right? And, so you can, if it happens to be what we did, you can point to it and say, well, it was the behavioral science, infused or informed messaging, but you can't necessarily in a situation like that point to the single word or the single phrase that did it, The other way is, like I said, you have the exact same email, the exact same subject line, but only one word is different, or the exact same email, but two different subject lines. And so you can at least point to the subject line, we were talking earlier about loss aversion before we went on air, but you see that pretty commonly, this idea of people are being more motivated to avoid the pain of loss than to achieve the pleasure of gain. Although in marketing, we often double down on the gains.
Yeah.
So you could test something like, the idea of order now and save $300, or you could test that against wait and you'll pay $300 more tomorrow. So it's like, do we want to talk about the savings, the benefit, or do we want to say if you wait, you're going to have to pay more, which would be more loss aversion, and so slightly different language, but you've definitely identified the behavioral science there and you see what works. A colleague of mine tested something. His client was selling ISO certifications. And so he literally had it down to one word. He tested ISO certification, will your company pass? ISO certification, will your company fail? So it was literally down to one word, wow. Fail representing loss aversion, and the loss aversion version won,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think Tim had a hidden agenda there because he's trying to figure out how he can measure his own in his new position. He's like trying to take notes on, I can use that and I can use that. I got to show the value that I bring to my organization here. Come on.
I got that wired. Come
on. Nancy, one of the things that I loved about this book is you bring in a variety of different behavioral science insights, biases, various different pieces. And as you said up at the beginning, it's less about the science, although I do say you bring in a lot of really good science. So it's not light on science. It's there. But you talk about the application and how do you do this? And you use a lot of case studies and a lot of really great insights on that. One of the chapters, and each chapter kind of covers a couple different, biases and kind of gets deep into one of them. One of them that I loved was this about framing. And we've talked a lot about framing on the show, but your chapter was actually called Labeling and Framing. And so for our listeners, can you describe what the difference is between framing and labeling, and when or why what's the difference and why would I care?
Sure. And I put them together because they are kind of similar, but the research into labeling shows that if you label somebody as part of a group, they'll start to automatically behave as if they're part of that group, even if they hadn't previously thought of themselves that way. So I thought that's really an interesting, thing for marketers to know, because, if you tell someone that they're part of a group, they're going to start to behave like it. It's like, wow, that's almost gold to us, right? And there was some research that was done where I think it was done in Chicago with an election coming up, and people were interviewed ostensibly about the ballot questions and the candidates and, just kind of their voting history, all of that. But then they were arbitrarily divided into two groups, just randomly put into one group or another. And the researchers went to one group and said, you guys are the more politically active. And then they watched to see what would happen a few days later when it was time to go to the polls. And what they found was 15% more of those people who were told they were more politically active actually showed up to vote, because that's what you do, right? If you're someone who's politically active, you show up and vote. And that was really the only difference. Some people were told they were, some people weren't, and had nothing to do with their past behaviors or the way they answered the questions. So when you think about it in marketing, that opens up possibilities for us, because we're trying to get people to behave in a certain way, like our current customers behave. For example, we're trying to get our you're a connoisseur of fine wines if you happen to be selling wines, or, you're somebody who, recognizes a smart business opportunity and you're not afraid to seize it. But, saying things like that where people start to feel like, ooh, that's me, and if I'm, if I am a member of someone, of a group that appreciates fine wine, well, obviously I'm going to take advantage of this great opportunity to buy this case or whatever. So I think there's real opportunity there. And then framing, could be a little, it's related for sure, but it's just the way we look at something. I mean, the classic example is, this glass is half empty, this glass is half full. How I'm framing it, how I describe it kind of influences how you're going to think about it. Because of what I've said about it, it's going to color the way you think about it. So, it's ideal for marketers when they're maybe trying to take something that could potentially be, a bit of a liability, and you turn it into something that makes you think of it in just the opposite way. A crowded restaurant is cozy. A noisy restaurant is lively. So things that, it's kind of, just getting you to look at things a different way by the framing that you're using. We did a piece for a client, and they were selling patient lending. It was for dentists, and it was, ways for the dental customers to take out a loan. And, we did some research, and what we found is, most dentists already had some kind of a patient financing system in place, and B, they all kind of felt like 6 of one, half a dozen of another, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, that's a tough thing to do. You can't argue that you need one because they already have one, and it's hard to argue that ours is different because they don't even want to get beyond, I already have one. So trying to tell them, no, wait, ours is different. We can't even get our foot in the door to say that, because you say patient financing system and they're like, no, we're done. Check that off the list, on to the next thing. So, we tried this approach where we said something like, because you're a doctor who cares about your patients, you should be interested in this. And we led with that, kind of like, labeling them that way, or if you want, kind of like turning, framing this not as this is great for, for your practice, but this is going to be great for your patients. And because you care about your patients, so it's kind of a little bit of both. I mean, it was probably more labeling than it was framing, honestly, but we got like a 65% lift over the control using that, because it kind of broke through, and it was like, yeah, you're right. I already have one, and I think of them as pretty much the same. But now you're telling me that this is actually going to be better for my patients. It might not really make any difference for me in the practice, but for my patients, and that's what I got into this business for. So it's kind of a nice example there, and certainly moves the needle for our clients.
Yeah, we just interviewed Jonah Berger. His episode will be coming out soon, and he has a new book called Magic Words. And again, that very component of asking or labeling the identity. And so it gets into this concreteness of the words that you're using about how they describe themselves or their desired self, and tapping into the power of that self-identity to move me into action, which is the piece that you're just talking about. And I think it's fantastic and a really great insight. So.
Yeah. There's that. So I think he probably talks about, or he probably will talk about, because I think he wrote about it, the noun identity effect. Instead of using the verb, you use the noun, which is awesome. But Kurt, it just dawned on me. I have a better example for framing, and it came out of, I think it was a New Zealand beer company, and they were using the byproduct of brewing beer to create a biofuel. So suddenly the idea of drinking beer wasn't like, something that you did to enjoy yourself or to blow off steam. They framed the idea of having a glass of beer as helping to save the environment, helping to save the world. And so it's like it just gets you to think of it in a completely different way, and I think that's a good example of framing. And they were operating in a declining market, and I think they managed to get sales up like 10% or something, which was a pretty interesting story,
Well, we're going to have to go have a beer now, because we got to go save the world. Yeah. So there you go.
DP Export, I think, was the name of the beer, but yeah.
I think we should all do it in New Zealand. Just,
there we go. We'll meet up there next week. How about that?
If I have a vote, let's just play. This is fun, actually. Just talking about some of the more. It is a little behavioral sciencey, and I don't want to get too far away from the application. But before we went live, you were talking about the rhyme is reason effect, and about how absolutely powerful and delightful it is, and how it's just not being leveraged these days. Could you talk a little bit about that, Nancy?
Absolutely, Tim. Yeah. So there's something that behavioral scientists have found called rhyme is reason bias, or the rhyme is reason effect. And This guy named Matt McGlone, a researcher. I think he's out of University of Texas in Austin, if I'm not mistaken, but he did a deep dive into it. And what he found is you can have two sentences that basically say the same thing, basically convey the same information. And an example that he used was, woes unite foes or woes unite enemies, right? Foes, enemies, they're the same, woes, I mean, it means the same thing. It conveys the same information, but people will judge the rhyming phrase to be the more accurate, more truthful phrase. And that's the idea of, rhyme is reason bias. People, because the rhyming phrases are easier for the human brain to process, it just feels right? We process it faster, it feels right. And when something feels right for us as people, it's not a big leap to assume that it is right. And so when you think about, slogans or strap lines or taglines or theme lines for campaigns, what a great opportunity to have something that rhymes. Although it could also be your doesn't have to be your tagline. It could be your subject line or your headline, or it could be the title of your content, whether it's a white paper or a webinar. But if it rhymes, not only is it easier to recall, which is bonus number one or advantage number one, but then advantage number two, which is arguably more important, is people have a tendency to believe it more. So, if you can manage to, for example, write a headline where, you're saying something about your company and it rhymes, 80% of people will read a headline, maybe only 20% will read the body copy. So it puts the onus on us as marketers to really make those headlines work. If you could figure out a way to probably, bake in a benefit or, a competitive advantage in your headline in a way that rhymes, that's like, that's a real win for you. People are going to remember and they're going to believe it.
I thank you that was a great explanation, and thank you for kind of covering the most salient aspects of this effect. Isn't just it's easy to remember, because that's the cleverness and the ease of remembering is important, especially when it comes to brand recognition, even brand consideration probably. But to explain it with the second aspect of that people perceive it as being more accurate, more true, like there's actually more truth in it. That's amazing that our brains process it not just as, oh, I can remember it, but I can process it as more true, more accurate. It's an amazing leap to, and yet our brains make it instantaneously.
Yeah, it's easier for us to retrieve it, and because it's easier to retrieve it, it feels right. And like I said, it's not a big leap to assume it is right. I mean, imagine you're in the grocery store, you're standing in the paper towel aisle, and there's all these different paper towels, but then you see, oh, Bounty, the clicker picker upper, and you think, well, that's the one I'm going to get because, I don't, I want to stop those spills quickly. I don't want the liquid spilling off the table and onto the floor, whatever it is, or maybe you're in the battery aisle and it's, Duracell, no battery is stronger, longer. And you think to yourself, it's bad enough I have to be here buying batteries because, my battery died at the wrong moment, but make sure it doesn't happen again, right? So it's, that recall can actually be very, helpful for marketers, in terms of, not just, remembering the brand, but, at point of sale to actually get that purchase.
Well, and it's interesting because before we went on air, we were talking about this and the concept that in the 70s and 80s, it seemed like that was used a lot more, right? The couple that you just mentioned, I think, have been around for a long, long time. And not used as much today. At least that's the appearance on my side. Is that the case from what you're seeing as well? And why do you think that might be?
Yeah, I don't think it's used as much. In fact, the two that I mentioned, the Duracell and the Bounty clicker picker, they've been around for a little while, but not nearly as long, as some like Nationwide is on your side. That came out in the 60s, right? And they stuck by it. Yeah. Or Folgers, the best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup, and they set that to music, right, yep. Tim? They set that to music, and
thank goodness.
So that's. Goodness. But I think when that also came out in the 60s, when it first came out, I remember reading this, Folgers trailed behind Maxwell House. After they introduced the tagline, the rhyming tagline, not only did they close the gap, they actually overtook Maxwell House eventually. And I'm sure it had, to do with a lot of things, not just the tagline, but it's an interesting contributor, right? When I was growing up, there was, plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is for Pepto-Bismol. And there was, Timex watches, takes a licking and keeps on ticking, and there'd be great ads around these too. I mean, Joel Sedelmeier was a director who did, the Pepto-Bismol ads for a while, and they were incredible, they were so good,
Well, and we can remember them to this day,
and we
right?
can remember them. Yes,
these are things that I haven't heard plop plop fizz fizz in years. But if you would have asked me Pepto Bismol, I could have come up with that. That is that recall piece that you talked about, and yeah, it's amazing to me. And to that point, I think it's an underused aspect in today's world.
Yeah, and I don't know why. That was the other part of your question. I don't know whether people just thought it was kind of trite or cutesy or old-fashioned. I'm not sure why it fell out of favor, but there's some practicality to having something that rhymes from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, behavioral grooves is the cool. I don't know. We got to figure out some groove on
what rhymes with groove.
It's
like orange. It's like what rhymes with orange? I feel like we dug ourselves a hole on that one, Kurt.
Oh, there we go. Anyway, so another part, and again, there's lots of really great insights in all of these chapters. A couple that I've picked out for me that really made an impact is this idea in the very last chapter they talk about. It's about time and time perception and that impact on buying behaviors. And one aspect that I found, so we talk temporal discounting, we know, future, that kind of piece, and immediate is better than future, all those aspects. But it was really interesting. And I hadn't thought about this before, but how birthdays impact purchases. And I wanted to get just you to tell our listeners a little bit about that and help us kind of take that information away.
Yeah, so, you've talked about temporal discounting, but there's another temporal that's important to us as, marketers who apply behavioral science, and that's the idea of temporal landmarks. And temporal landmarks are periods of time in someone's life that they feel are different than all the other periods of time in their life. And because they feel they're different, they kind of imbue them with special meaning. And so one example of a temporal landmark is your birthday, because temporal landmarks are traditionally times when we kind of close the door or close the chapter on who we used to be, and we open the door or open the chapter on to the person we're going to be. So we feel like we have a fresh start. As a matter of fact, Katie Milkman and her colleagues refer to this as the fresh start effect. But we basically feel that, all right, that was who I used to be. Last year, maybe things didn't go so well. I didn't accomplish everything I wanted to. There were a few mistakes, a few missteps, but this year, I'm going to be able to do it. I've got a fresh start. It's a clean state. I'm feeling empowered. And this is, why it's so important for marketers, because, at these periods of temporal landmarks, people feel empowered. They feel that they can achieve their goals. They feel more open to trying something new, whether that's a new product or taking on a new behavior. And so that's a great time for us to tap into them. And it could be, New Year's Day is probably the granddaddy of all temporal landmarks, but it's times that are new beginnings. It could be a birthday, as you say. It could be starting a new job. It could be the start of a new week, right? Mondays are temporal landmarks. But that's when people feel like, all right, it's, I can do this. So, I did some work for AARP, and I noticed that they sent out an email. I didn't write it, but I loved it. It was a birthday email. They sent an email out to their members. They were wishing the members happy birthday, and then they were suggesting to the members that they start a new healthy walking routine. And I thought that's brilliant, because on your birthday is when you're more likely to do that, probably more likely than almost any other day of the year, except for perhaps, I don't know, New Year's Day, right? Those New Year's resolutions. But, it's when you're feeling like, I know I should be doing this, but this is the time I'm going to do it. So it's interesting. Hal Hirschfield and Adam Alter did some research into what they called nine-enders, people whose ages ended in 9, 29, 39, 49, 59, and they found that there was some interesting data. So people were more likely to run a marathon for the first time at 29 versus 30, or I think they were twice as likely, and they were 3 times as likely at 49 versus 50. But then they also did some research into the Ashley Madison website, which is apparently where one goes if one wishes to have an extramarital affair. This is how I learned about it, their research. But men were overrepresented by, I think, it was like 1 in 8 men had a birthday or had an age of 29, 39, 49, or 59. They were overrepresented by like 14%, I think the number was. But so not only are we more open to trying something new, but apparently we're more open to trying someone new too.
Okay.
I think there's a procrastination part there, right? The idea of like, oh, before I'm 30, I'm going to do this. And then it just creeps up on you. And all of a sudden, oh, well, I got to do it now because I made that commitment. We're actually having Adam on the show pretty soon. So we're going to interview him. We might bring up some of those questions as we're talking about that as we go forward with that. Is there an element, and I want to take this to the broader perspective, so going back away from some of the specifics in your book, but just a general piece. Are marketers trending toward integrating behavioral science more into their work, do you think, today than they have in the past? Kind of like, maybe the fundamentals of psychology got informed advertisers in the 70s and 80s. Is behavioral science starting to weave its way more into the work that you guys see in marketing?
I think so, yes. I mean, there are certain companies that have brought behavioral science to the C-suite. There's a chief behavioral science officer, or if not that, it's a very senior level person who's representing behavioral science. And I've seen, different agencies. I mean, Ogilvy, I think we'd mentioned earlier, has a huge behavioral science practice with Chris Graves, and Rory Sutherland is all over it. And I've seen some smaller ones pop up as well, so I think, when I talk about it as being a bit of an emerging discipline, for marketing, but I think that it's growing. I think the interest is growing, and, marketers are starting to apply behavioral science techniques and see what they can do for them, and pleased with the results, they're continuing along that pathway.
Is there anything that you think that marketers have been missing, by not applying behavioral science? Are there any sort of big gaps or problems that, behavioral science can help address, Nancy?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tim. I think it's probably maybe two answers spring to mind. I think one thing that we miss is, we go out, we do all of this research, we survey our customers and our prospects, and we have focus groups, and we get our answer and we run away and we work with it. And, I used to sit behind the mirror too and, watch all that. And I think what we need to realize is, even though our customers and prospects think they're telling us why they do what they do, they really don't always know that there are other factors at play that influence people's decisions, and they're not even aware of them. So, there was a time when we used to think like you're sitting there watching a focus group, and the biggest danger was if you had one person who was really, really talkative and really, really forceful, everyone just kind of falls in line with them, and we're like, that's the biggest problem we have to try to mitigate for, the biggest thing we have to try to avoid. We don't want one person just influencing everyone. And the truth of the matter is that, while that is an issue, that's not the big thing we have to worry about. What we have to appreciate is, people will tell us what they believe is the truth. They're not really trying to lie to us. They're not trying to appease us or, make us like them. Or they're telling us what they really believe, but it may not really be the full story. There are often factors at play that influence people's decisions that they're not aware of. And I think when marketers realize that, it's very helpful, because then you can start to use the research in different ways. And there are actually some behavioral science informed methods of research that try to kind of get to the real reasons, the implicit actions, So I think that's one answer. And the other answer is, I think sometimes behavioral science shines a light on the fact that there are some counterintuitive messages that we could put out there that maybe we wouldn't think to use, but actually can be very, very valuable. We're talking about loss aversion. Instead of saying save $100 today, you can say you're going to have to pay $100 tomorrow. And you might think to yourself, oh, why would you phrase that in a negative way? That's terrible. No. But it turns out that actually could be the more motivating way to do it. We did some work for a client where we used the reciprocity principle. And it was a client that was selling financial services through financial advisors, and the financial advisors could work with, a handful of different providers. And over time, some financial advisors just kind of fell off the wagon or fell by the wayside. And so they had this group of financial advisors that up until a year or so ago had worked with them, and then they'd stopped, and they had tried to call them and email them and reactivate them, and they hadn't really gotten anywhere. So they came to us and they said, we want your help reactivating them. Let's send them a gift. And so right away you would say, now that's counterintuitive. Why would you spend the money to send a gift to people who are no longer doing business with you? Why not, if you're going to spend that money, spend on the people that are doing business with you to reinforce the positive behavior, right? I mean, that seems to make sense, right? It seems counterintuitive that you would send a gift to someone who over a year ago, mind you, stopped doing business. Not like just recently where maybe you'll quickly reel them back in. I mean, it's a year ago, you've tried. They've really indicated no interest. But anyway, we sent out a gift, and they not only reactivated a bunch of people, they said that the return on the investment for the campaign was $68 million.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, so I think, again, if you didn't understand behavioral science, if you didn't understand the reciprocity principle, which is basically when you give someone something, they feel obliged to return the favor. They feel obliged to answer in kind. And they actually sometimes will even give you back more just to kind of get out of that sense of the idea that they owe you something. And the wonderful thing about the reciprocity principle is, it's built into us, I think since probably back in, the early days of mankind, where we really needed to get along because we would die if we got ostracized. So we're cooperative, we're civil, we try to get along. And, so the wonderful thing is, even if you didn't ask for a favor, once it's in your hands, it still triggers this idea of reciprocity. You could say like, look, it's one thing if I ask you to do me a favor, then I'm going to feel like I have to do one for you. And this is true. But even if somebody gives you something without your asking, you still kind of feel like, it's why, the address labels and the fundraising appeals work so well, So again, a little bit counterintuitive, but absolutely an example of, how understanding behavioral science can help marketers get that, that response that they're looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting as you say that. It brings to mind the story you brought up earlier of your boss and kind of thinking of the tagline for AT&T in different pieces, and he struck on that, but it wasn't because of the science. It was because of experience and kind of various different pieces. And what I hear you saying is that behavioral science now allows us to come upon some of those ahas, and maybe some ahas that we might not have even thought of before, in a much more structured and efficient way. And I love that concept as we think about it. It's one of the things that Tim and I have talked about in the past, is this idea that, behavioral science is oftentimes just putting names and really understanding, common phenomena. The idea of the restaurateur putting the people at the front of the restaurant in the windows, because, when we do that, we get more people in. Well, he doesn't know it's social proof, but it doesn't matter, right? He does it. But this is a way to kind of jumpstart some of those thinking patterns and different ways of looking at the situation that you're in.
Yeah, I look at it. The book is 288 pages, 17 chapters, and about 25 different tactics. And I say it's a great place to start to figure out what you're going to test. You know what your problem is, the answer that you want to get to, or the action you want to get to. You go through this and you're like, all right, these are going to give me some things that will, help me test in a smart way. Is everyone going to work for everyone every time? No, of course not, but you're better armed this way, because you're like, all right, I'm kind of stacking the deck in my favor, and I'm making it more likely that something is going to work, or something is going to work even better, and maybe in some cases it'll be like, oh, I didn't know that was called that, but okay, that's why what I'm doing currently works. Or it might be like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that. And that's the wonderful thing about all 25 of them being in one place. It's like a hands-on handbook, you're like, all right, it's a good little refresher in some cases. It's an idea starter in other cases. And it's also, in some cases just new information. It's like, even when I was researching the book, I came upon some things. I was like, I didn't even know that. Wow. That, got to try that. Got to put that in my bag of tricks.
That's very cool. I just love that you happen to know off the top of your head it's 288 pages. That is an author who loves her book. And I love that, who you've spent a lot of time creating it, and I'm glad that you love it, frankly. I wanted to switch over and talk about a story that you brought up in the book about Adele, and this idea that in 2021 she releases an album, and Spotify puts it out, and in the world of Spotify it's shuffled, and Adele says no, this record was created in such a way that these songs should be played in order. And you talk about it as sort of as defaults. And I was wondering if you could actually maybe relay that story, talk a little bit about the importance of defaults, and then we're going to get into music.
Okay, yeah.
I thought this was music. You're talking music already. Look at that.
Yeah. First I was like, Dell? You mean the computer company? Oh, Adele. Right. Okay. Yes.
Adele. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. So it's defaults, and it's also this idea of choice architecture. So the way choices are presented kind of influences the decisions people make about them. So with Spotify, they would just automatically have things on shuffle or random. So it wasn't necessarily the way Adele or any artist laid the tracks down. It would things would just play unless you went in and toggled the right switch. You'd have to physically go in and change it. But if you left things the way they were, you were just going to not hear it the way Adele or any other artist had put the tracks down. It was just going to be kind of in a random fashion. And she actually went to Spotify and said, look, I did this in a particular order for a particular reason. And I want my listeners to hear it the way I want them to hear it, the way I intended for them to hear it. And she actually, got this major victory. So now things changed. And in the past, the default was you'd be on shuffle. And now the default is you're going to listen to it the way the artist meant it to be listened to, unless you go in and you change the default, So, and the thing about defaults is very often we don't change them. We're too lazy, or in some cases there's kind of this implied authority, it's like, oh, well, they must have it this way for a reason. Like, this is the superior reason. This is the best setting to have it on, So sometimes we just don't think to change it. Other times we think, well, I'm not an expert, but if they think this is the way it should be, they're the experts. I'll leave it that way. But, so it was a big victory for her. And I remember reading it, and I was, is at the right time as I was writing the book, I'm like, boom, that's going right in there, because it's so applicable.
Well, and I didn't even know there was a toggle switch that I could change that. So the default is going to be the default, because I was unaware that there was even a choice. So.
And Spotify didn't respond when I asked for the same thing about my records. I just wonder why that was.
Maybe the email got lost.
Scale.
I don't know.
Scale.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's turn this. We're going to transition from defaults in general to, do you tend to listen to music in the order that it was presented on a record?
I think I do.
Cool.
Well, if you listen to Broadway's, you're telling a story, right?
Yeah, the story's going to build.
Obviously you can just listen to some of the things, but there's a narrative to there's an arc, there's the flow, there's all of that.
I could also argue, though, that sometimes you just want a little send in the clowns. You just want Sondheim just to have one song. You want Bernadette Peters on that one tune, and that's kind of all I need, and then I can move on to South Pacific or or something else. But how about you, Nancy? Actually, this is not about me. This is about you. So forgive me.
I'm sorry. What?
Yeah. So you listen? You said you tend to listen in order, and do you do that with shows, with Broadway shows? Do you tend to actually tee them up and just go start to finish?
Yeah, I will. It's not that I don't have my favorites. I do. A little Officer Krupke would be fine from West Side Story. I love the lyrics sometimes, and the just kind of the rhymes that are the rhyming schemes, or the turns of phrase that I enjoy. But basically, yeah, I will have a tendency to just kind of, if I'm going to put a CD in or put an album on, just go from start to finish. And to Kurt's point, even more so with Broadway, because it does allow you to just kind of relive the show, which is lovely. But just, I don't know, I have a tendency to be more of a passive listener, I guess, than an active listener. So I'll choose, what I want to listen to, and I'll put it on, and there it will be, and I'll just let it play through. But I will say it has less to do with, my thinking, oh, that's the way the artist intended, and probably more to do with my just, I'm going to put this on and just let it play,
That's fair.
No. It's Nancy, you're a person after my own heart, though, as you talk about lyrics, right? Because lyrics, for me, it's interesting. Tim and myself and another friend of ours, during COVID, we got on, on Zoom calls, and we share music with each other, and I realized, I'm like going, oh, some of the music you guys like, you like it because of the riffs and the guitars and all the musical components. And I'm like going, I don't get this. I'm like there. And then I put on mine and it's all about the lyrics. It's all like, this is like, do you hear that twist of phrase that they used and how they used it? So you and me, I think we probably get our musical taste would probably fall in alignment there. So
Nancy, if you had to spend a year on a desert island, let's ask the desert island question of you. I know that you've heard this before, but you had two artists, full catalogs to take with you. Any combination of these two artists, what two musical artists would you take with you?
So I think I'd go with the Beatles, right? Because there's a wide range there, and then it's going to have to be one of the Broadway ones. I do like Wicked, and I do like Pippin, so maybe we'll go with Schwartz. Maybe we'll go with Stephen Schwartz.
Stephen Schwartz, okay. There's not a bad decision there. Not bad. But it's interesting that it sounded like you're bringing up the Beatles for the variety of sounds, right? And platforms and everything from like their early stuff is just so poppy and sugary and snip snap, and you get to Rubber Soul and it starts to unfold and almost fall apart, right? When you get to Sgt. Pepper, it's a totally different world.
So I'm thinking I don't have a lot of faith in being rescued, so I might be on this island for a long, long time, right? So I was thinking, all right, I grew up with the Beatles, so, and there's something to be said. I heard this recently, that the music you heard when you were like kind of in your formative years, that's the music you return to, right? And that's what I grew up with. But then as I thought about it, I'm like, okay, this is pretty serious, because like I said, I exercise, walk, and I listen to you guys all the time, and so I'm interested to hear what people say. And I used to think to myself, I wonder what I would answer, never dreaming I'd ever have the opportunity to answer, but I wonder what I would answer, And I was I could see myself doing the Beatles, because there is so much, there is such a range that, I could be there for a long, long time on that island, and this would kind of get me through.
Yeah, it's a popular pick, and I think part of it is just because of that, the sheer volume and differentiation of the music that they have, and so fantastic. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for being a guest on Behavioral Grooves. It was a fantastic conversation, and just thanks.
Kurt and Tim, thank you so very much. It was just awesome to be here. I listen to you all the time. I can't believe I'm actually talking to you, so thank you so much.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on our discussion with Nancy, take a deep dive into some of the topics, and talk about whatever else comes into our drained and veined brains. Man, there we go.
Ooh, drained and veined.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And we have some disdain about the pain that we're going to, I'm trying to find another word that rhymes and I can't. There you go. But
yeah. Well, it's the main thing that we want to talk about, right? It's the main claim.
Yeah. And it even is bigger than Ukraine, and it will give nobody a migraine when we talk about the insane, refrain. Flame. Oh my! I should definitely not be a rhymer or rapper. That's all I have to say. There you go.
But you are a songwriter. You've already done it. So that's. You may not be doing a lot of it in the future, but you did it.
Yeah,
so.
well,
Okay.
But all right, so I think we teed this up in the intro. We want to talk about rhyme as reason effect. We want to talk about the 9 effect. But before we go to either of those, Tim, I just want to, I want to talk about this because we have a couple other, interviews coming up in the near future that are kind of specific on an industry or different pieces, like This Is Marketing. And the fascinating thing that I love about behavioral science is that we're talking about these behavioral science insights with Nancy, and the entire time I'm sitting there thinking, well, you can apply this inside of work. You can apply this to your business if you're a small business owner. You can apply this to the community group that you work with. That the applications of these are not just around marketing. They are around, life and business, as we usually talk about in the intro.
Yeah, very horizontal, right? They cross lots and lots of industries and applications. Even within an organization, I love thinking about even inside an organization. It's not just marketing, but it can also apply to HR, of course, right? Big obvious stuff. But what about risk and compliance or engineering or, I mean, any opportunity that we have to interface with human beings? Guess what? We can apply behavioral science.
And the insights in the way that Nancy talked about what she's talking about. So, for instance, we'll talk about, rhyme as reason effect. And I'm sitting there going, we do a ton of work with companies. My company, the Lantern Group, does a ton of work with companies on communicating internally with employees. And I'm just sitting here going, we don't rhyme enough. Right? We don't take those moments to really impact the memory and different facets of within an organization to say, hey, let's create a tagline for this program and make it rhyme. Let's use rhyming in the speech that the president or the general manager is going to give to the employees. We don't use some of the other insights that Nancy talked about enough. And so I'm sitting here writing down all of these things. We talked with Jonah Berger before. I was thinking the same thing. God, I got to be using more concrete words. So instead of talking about, over 50% of us, I need to be saying 54% of, our employees do X as opposed to, or 54.4% of our employees do X, right? Those are the things that I think are going to be, this application across multitude of fields. So I just wanted to put that on the table before we got into
I'm glad you did. And I just also want to say, let's transition here to rhyme as reason effect, that it is a very powerful effect, right? It's part of the fluency effects.
Okay.
And, so fluency has been researched, going back to Richard Nisbett and Tim Wilson in the late 1970s.
Wow.
When they started sort of framing it as like a halo, like they started realizing that we actually, when we hear things that rhyme, for instance, or they're overtly familiar, then we just take them as more credible. They become more accurate. That they really take on kind of a life of their own when it's easy for us to grasp and easy for us to understand. And that's where the fluency concept comes in. It wasn't deeply studied until the 2000s, though.
Wow.
And there's a lot of researchers who have done some really good work on it. But
we talked with Richard Nisbett in episode 249, so we didn't talk about this per se, but I think it's interesting when you talk about fluency and the reason why rhyming works, right? This idea that it's easier to come to mind. There's that element that it's more memorable. I think you talk about it in songs, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you don't write a song. I mean, lots of people do write songs that don't rhyme, but, rhyming is one of those key tenets of songwriting. Right? I mean, how do you use it?
The songs that get to the top of the hit list are almost always have rhyme schemes. That Alan Kruger did some work on this. He's an economist. He was an economist. He has passed away. But he was an economist, I think, at Yale, and he did some work on what makes a top 10 hit, and rhyme schemes are a key part of it. And it's because of that fluency. It's because we process it in a way that, it's easier for us to listen to. It's more pleasing, right? It's more memorable when we have that fluency, when we have that rhyme scheme. And so it becomes the norm in songwriting to do it. Now, there are plenty of songwriters that go outside of those bounds very effectively.
Right.
However, that's not the norm, and it's not the way to get to number one hits.
And the idea that Nancy brings is marketers and other people, as we've just talked about, beyond marketing, should be using this because that helps in bringing that memorability, that ease of recall, the element of, hey, I find this more pleasing than other ways. So if I am a marketer and I'm trying to sell something, what do you want? You want people to process that information faster so it feels right. You want them to believe it, right? Isn't part of fluency that it's more believable once you get that? You get a quick recall. All of that is an advantage for marketers.
It really is. Quick quiz, Kurt. I just want to throw you some brands and just see if you have a recollection of the brand stories or the taglines that went with them.
All right, I'm closing my eyes so I'm not seeing the script. Here we go.
Okay, Nationwide Insurance.
Nationwide is by your side.
I think so. Is on your side.
On your side. On your side. See, I'm not looking, people. This is real. You're testing my whole thing here.
Okay, what about Timex?
Oh, keeps a tick. Takes a licking and keeps on ticking. That's easy.
Yeah, and that's a brand we don't even see that hardly anymore.
I know.
You and I are old enough to remember Kurt Gowdy on television, making those takes a licking and keeps on ticking.
And I can kind of remember it's like the watch gets dropped and beaten up, and it's in a tire one time. Like they find it in the, after it's gone through been riding in a tire and it still works. And
of course.
And what's interesting for me on that one, I mean, actually all of these, Nationwide, on your side has the name in it, but Timex, it's not saying,
That's
is
right.
the Bex or, it's not rhyming with Timex. It's just having a tagline that rhymes with it.
Folgers was the same way. The best part of waking up is the Folgers in your cup.
Yeah.
They have the brand name in the tagline, but they're not rhyming with Folgers.
Yeah.
It's the cup, which of course is a fantastic, association to have with the brand.
Waking up and in your cup, and it's I won't go into that, but I use this example a lot that they really did an interesting thing with their marketing when Folgers did it, and I think for anybody who is of a certain age, if I just start mentioning, imagine this TV commercial, right? Picture a car driving up on a snowy kind of curved driveway. Kid gets out, packs a bag over his shoulder, opens the door. All of a sudden, this little girl runs down and yells, "Peter!" And he goes, "Shh." And then they go into the kitchen and they're brewing a cup of coffee. And with that coffee, what you see is really interesting. So first off, can, and you hear a can opener and it goes whoosh, and then you see the coffee percolating and you see the steam coming off of the percolating, and then cut to a scene upstairs and you see what you now assume is a mother and father, and they're being woken up by the smell of the coffee. And then you get this reunion of this kid who had come home from college, basically. And it is this, they aired that commercial for a multitude of years, only at Christmas time. But it was one of those key pieces where Folgers was like in the number 3 position, and they moved to the number 1 position in coffee. And, as you said, the best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. So that rhyme, that remembered it, but it's that waking up and cup, and they visually showed that in the commercial by having, that sound and the steam and all of those things, which is really interesting. And I just went way too long on talking about that.
We could have just put a link and Groovers could just check out the link. But no, you described it fantastically for the last 35 minutes. I think that was great.
I'm sorry, listeners. I get kind of passionate about some of this stuff, and I'm not even a marketer. All right, Tim. I'm going to ask you real quick, though. Pepto-Bismol. Tagline.
Pepto-Bismol was plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is.
It goes to a jingle, and you sing it. That's the one I thought. There you go. All right.
Yeah, of course. Perfectly. Okay, so let's move on to the 9 effect.
Okay. All right.
First of all, what is the 9 effect? Let's just reiterate that for listeners. What's the power of 9? Why is it important?
You tell me.
Oh, okay. I was actually asking.
Oh,
you,
I'm sorry. I can go. No, go ahead.
No. But it for me resonates most in retail. It's the $29.99 price on something. So it's $29.99 US. That is, with rather than saying $30.
Yep.
Right. And the idea behind that, when I think the early research was done on this, like in the 1970s, was that, $29.99 will look like it's less money than $30. And that turns out to largely be the case. That actually turns out to be the case. There has been, I think, some additional work by Anderson and Semester.
Okay.
That recently, they're from MIT and Penn, I think, but they've demonstrated that the effect is stronger in retail when customers are less familiar with the price of something. So you can't just have something that everybody knows the price to, and give it a 99 at the end and expect that you're going to think, well, it's actually less expensive.
Yeah. And I like how also Nancy talked about it, and this idea of things that happen when you're 20. People are more likely to run a marathon when they're 29 than when they're 30, 39 than when they're 40, 49 than when they're 50. And it's this, as she talked about, temporal landmarks that we have. And 9 is a big, because it's a decade, and we think about those. And so I think 9 has that power too, because the way that we process numbers is we're on a decile system. It's a 10 system. And so we know that 9 is 1 less. It's not, doesn't go to 11, Tim. It goes to 9. It's 1 less. You see, I don't have to turn it up.
But it's 1 louder.
It's 1 less loud. I don't know.
And that, I'm glad that you brought up this idea of temporal landmarks, because we easily count things in 10. We are sort of programmed for that. And these 9s demarcate the end of that, of whatever that first 10 is.
Yep.
Right? We're getting to the end of it, and it's an important jumping off point. I think Adam Alter and Hal Hirschfield have done a lot of work on that, and we're actually going to be talking to Adam in a couple of weeks.
So that'll be good.
That should be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, if anybody has questions that you want us to ask Adam, send it to us in social media. All right, Tim, I want to end on this. How can we rhyme for behavioral grooves? How can we take this? What about this?
All right.
Behavioral grooves gives you the moves.
Have you been like working on this?
Yes, I have. I've been thinking about this, right? We have to, we got to take the information that we get from our guests and use it.
Okay.
What else?
Well, what about get on the move with behavioral grooves?
Ooh, I like that. Right.
Or improve your moves with behavioral grooves.
How about behavioral grooves is the right move for you? There you go. Improve your groove with behavioral grooves. I like that. There we go. All right, listeners, we might have to have a poll out there about which of our taglines we might be moving with,
or moving away from.
All right. Well, there are many, many more things to talk about from our conversation with Nancy, but since I went so long on Folgers in your cup, we're going to have to just leave it there.
Okay. Well, that's totally cool, Kurt. But above and beyond the things that we covered in our conversation with Nancy, there are many practical tips in the book. So if you're a marketer, we would like you to add this to your list.
And even if you're not a marketer, read the book, because it gives you really insightful tips that you can use. So there you go. And speaking of lists, Tim, how about taking something off of your list, listeners, by leaving us a quick rating or a short review right now? That way you won't have to worry about doing it later, and you can just get it done.
I think there's some kind of a behavioral bias in there somewhere.
Do you think so? I'm sure there probably is. There's a behavioral bias. There's a behavioral insight in almost everything that we do, right? But if you'll have to wait until next time to hear exactly what that bias is, I don't know why. We'll have to wait, because we're gonna go out and research it or something, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Kurt, thanks. Groovers, thanks. Time to say thanks for listening. And we hope that you're able to take home some cool ideas from Nancy's work and put them to use this week as you go out and find your groove.